The 911 call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a frigid October morning. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Denise Jenkins, and it was taut with a brand of fear that dispatchers recognize instantly. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality beginning to fracture. She explained, her words clipped and fast, that her daughter was missing. Her 18-year-old daughter, Amara. Denise recounted the last conversation they had, just a few hours earlier, a little after 11 o'clock. Amara's car had broken down, but it was okay, she had insisted. She had found a garage. A man was helping her, a kind man. The memory of her daughter's confident, reassuring tone was now a source of pure terror for Denise, a detail that twisted like a knife in her gut. She had felt a flicker of unease then, a maternal instinct she had foolishly suppressed. Now that flicker was a raging inferno. The dispatcher took the details with practiced calm. Amara Jenkins, age 18, driving a blue 2008 sedan, last seen on the Old States Highway, about 20 miles outside of town, headed home from her job at the university library. The information was logged, a file was created, and a patrol car was dispatched to do a cursory check of the highway. But in the cold, dark hours before dawn, everyone knew the truth. A girl does not simply vanish from the side of a road. Something had found her in the dark. To understand what happened to Amara Jenkins, you have to understand who she was. She was not just a statistic in a missing persons report. She was a daughter, a friend, a student with a future so bright it was almost blinding. At 18, she carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She'd been accepted into the state university's prestigious engineering program on a full scholarship, a testament to a mind that saw the world in terms of systems, structures, and solutions. She was practical, responsible. While other freshmen were navigating the social labyrinth of dorm parties, Amara was working 20 hours a week, shelving books at the campus library. The job was quiet, meditative, and it paid for her car insurance and gas. It was a trade-off she made without complaint. She understood the concept of investment, of putting in the hard work now for a larger payoff later. Her car was a perfect metaphor for her life at that moment. It was a 2008 sedan, a hand-me-down from her grandfather, with faded blue paint and a constellation of small dings and scratches. The driver's side door groaned in protest every time it was opened, and the radio was permanently stuck on a classic rock station. Amara had affectionately named it the Beast, and she loved it with a fierce loyalty. It was not a symbol of wealth or status. It was a symbol of her independence. It was 4 wheels and an engine that carried her between her past, her present, and her future. On the night of October 28th, that engine began to fail. Amara had just finished her shift at the library. The campus was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of sodium lamps. She had walked to her car, the crisp autumn air, feeling good after hours spent in the stuffy silence of the archives. The drive home was usually her time to decompress, a 40-minute journey that took her from the bustling university town to the quiet suburban street where she lived with her mother. 10 minutes into the drive, she felt it. A slight hesitation, a stutter in the engine's rhythm, her brow furrowed with concern. She knew the Beast was old, but it was reliable. It had never done this before. She turned the radio down, listening intently. The engine coughed again, a sick metallic sound that made her heart sink. The headlights, which had been cutting a clear path through the darkness, began to flicker and dim. She was on the Old State Highway now, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt that cut through miles of dense woodland and dark fields. There were no streetlights here, no houses, just the moon, the stars, and the lonely ribbon of road. Her foot pressed harder on the accelerator, a silent prayer that she could coax the car just a few more miles. But the Beast had given all it had. With a final shuddering lurch, the engine died. The lights went out. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Amara coasted to the shoulder. the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound. She turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The dashboard was dark. The car was completely dead. She sat for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her breath fogging up the cold air in front of her. Panic began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, a small beacon in the oppressive darkness. 2 bars of service and a battery icon glowing a menacing red, 15%. She immediately called her mother. She kept her voice steady, betraying none of the fear that was beginning to coil in her stomach. She explained the situation, calmly, logically, as if it were just another problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced. It was during that call, as she stared out into the pitch-black landscape, that she saw it. A single point of light, far in the distance, off a small access road she hadn't even noticed before. It was faint, but it was there, a solitary light burning where there should have been only darkness. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through her anxiety. She told her mother she saw a light, maybe a house or a business. She would walk towards it. What she didn't know was that the light was not a beacon of hope. It was a lure. The encounter that would change everything was not a matter of chance. It was an appointment she was about to keep, set by a predator she had not yet met. After ending the call with her mother, promising to call back as soon as she knew more, Amara made a decision. It was a decision forged from pragmatism and a deep-seated belief in the fundamental goodness of people. Staying in the dead car on a deserted highway felt more dangerous than walking towards that distant light. She grabbed her jacket, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold night. The walk was unnerving. The access road was unpaved, her footsteps loud in the profound silence. The woods on either side were a wall of impenetrable black, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth setting her teeth on edge. The light grew closer, resolving itself into the shape of a low-slung building. A sign, faded and weather-beaten, hung above a large garage door. The words on it were a balm to her frayed nerves. Croft's Auto Repair, 24-hour service. Relief washed over her in a powerful wave. It felt like a miracle, a stroke of incredible luck. Of all the places to break down, she had done so within walking distance of a 24-hour garage. The universe, it seemed, had not abandoned her after all. The building itself was modest, a simple cinder block structure with a corrugated metal roof. It looked like it had been there for decades, a relic from a time when this lonely highway was a main thoroughfare. As she approached, the large bay door began to roll down with a rattling groan. A figure emerged from the smaller side door just before it closed. It was a man, wiping his hands on a greasy red rag. He looked to be in his late 40s with a stocky build and thinning brown hair. He wore a pair of worn denim overalls over a thermal shirt, the quintessential uniform of a man who worked with his hands. He stopped when he saw her, a look of mild surprise on his face. Then he smiled. It was a warm, disarming expression that instantly put her at ease. His eyes, a pale, unassuming blue, seemed to hold a genuine kindness. He spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that fit his appearance perfectly. He said he was just closing up for the night when he saw her car's headlights die out on the main road. He had been worried someone was stranded. Amara explained her situation, the words tumbling out in a rush of relief. The car just died, no warning. She didn't know what was wrong. The man nodded sympathetically, his gaze patient. He introduced himself as Silas Croft, the owner. He said it was lucky she'd broken down so close. This part of the highway, he explained, was a dead zone for cell service. A tow truck would have taken an hour to even get a call, let alone arrive. He offered to walk back to her car with her and take a look. Amara agreed immediately, gratitude overriding any residual caution. As they walked, Silas made easy small talk. He asked her name, where she was headed. When she told him she was an engineering student, he seemed genuinely impressed. He said it took a special kind of mind for that, a lot of discipline. He was flattering her, but it felt sincere, like the simple observation of an honest man. He talked about himself too. He explained that he kept the shop open late because he was a night owl. He said he did his best work when the world was quiet, without the constant interruption of phone calls and parts deliveries. He even mentioned a daughter, roughly her age, who was away at college studying to be a nurse. It was a masterful touch, a piece of fabricated empathy designed to create an immediate, powerful connection. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a father, a safe person. When they reached the beast, Silas popped the hood with an air of practiced expertise. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, its beam cutting through the darkness. He peered into the engine compartment, humming thoughtfully to himself. He asked her to try the ignition again. She did. Nothing. He poked and prodded at various wires, his movements efficient and sure. After a few minutes of this methodical inspection, he straightened up and clicked off his flashlight. He told her the bad news with a gentle sigh. He was pretty sure it was the alternator. It had completely failed, which was why the battery was drained and the whole system was dead. He spoke with an easy authority, using just enough technical jargon to sound completely convincing. He made the problem sound serious but not catastrophic. More importantly, he made it sound fixable. He told her it was no problem. He could get the car back to the shop and get to work on it. He assured her it was a far better option than leaving it on the side of the road, where it could get hit or towed by morning. His logic was impeccable. Every word he spoke was designed to lead her down a single path, one that ended with her and her car inside his garage under his control. For Amara, who saw the world in terms of problems and solutions, Silas Croft appeared to be the perfect solution. The thought of refusing his help never even crossed her mind. Why would it? Here was a kind, capable man, a father, offering her a lifeline in the middle of the night. To her, it was a simple transaction. Her car was broken. He was a mechanic. He would fix it. The human element, the potential for deception, was not part of her equation, a decision that would cost her her life. Silas had a small, powerful winch on a service truck parked behind his garage. With remarkable efficiency, he maneuvered the truck, hooked up the beast, and slowly towed it up the gravel road and into the main bay of the shop. The cavernous space was suddenly illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Amara blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. The garage was exactly what she expected it to be. It was cluttered but had an air of organized chaos. Massive tool chests on wheels stood against one wall, their drawers labeled with faded tape. Wrenches, sockets, and screwdrivers of every imaginable size hung from pegboards. The air was thick with the familiar, pungent smells of gasoline, oil, and cold steel. The concrete floor was stained with years of fluid spills. It felt authentic. It felt real. Silas gestured towards a small door in the corner. He suggested she wait in the office, where it was warmer. He said there was a coffee machine if she was interested. The offer was casual, thoughtful. Amara gratefully accepted, shivering slightly in the damp chill of the garage. The office was small and cramped, dominated by a large battered metal desk. A threadbare armchair was tucked into a corner next to a space heater that glowed a cheerful orange. It was a pocket of modest comfort in the industrial space, and Amara sank into the chair with a sigh of relief. Silas brought her a steaming mug of coffee. It was black and bitter, but it was hot, and she held it in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. He told her the repair would likely take a few hours. The alternator on her model, he explained with a shake of his head, was in a particularly tricky spot. It required patience. His words were carefully chosen to manage her expectations and subtly extend the timeline. He was not just fixing a car, he was setting a stage, and he needed time for the scene to play out. He actively discouraged her from considering any other options. When she half-heartedly mentioned calling a ride-sharing service, he scoffed gently. He said it would cost a fortune to get a car to come all the way out here, if she could even get a signal. He assured her with another of his warm smiles that he would have her back on the road before she knew it. He was isolating her. one logical argument at a time. It was then that she decided to call her mother again. She wanted to let Denise know that she was safe, that the car was being handled. She stepped just outside the office door for better reception. The call connected, and Amara quickly relayed the situation. She described the garage, the helpful mechanic named Silas. She told her mother how incredibly lucky she had been. On the other end of the line, Denise Jenkins felt that cold knot of maternal fear tighten. A garage open in the middle of nowhere, this late at night. A man she had never met. She voiced her concerns, her tone laced with an anxiety Amara couldn't quite understand. Denise asked if she was sure it was safe. She suggested Amara get the man's license plate number, just in case. She offered to come get her. Amara, feeling safe and taken care of, saw her mother's worry as overprotective. She laughed it off. She explained that Silas was a perfectly nice man, that he had a daughter her age. She insisted she was fine, that she was an adult capable of handling a simple car repair. She promised to call as soon as the car was fixed. The conversation was a critical turning point. It was the moment an external warning was offered, heard, and then summarily dismissed. Silas had been standing near the entrance to the bay, ostensibly looking for a tool. He had overheard Amara's side of the conversation. When she hung up, he looked over at her and smiled a knowing, fatherly smile. He said that mothers always worry, don't they? He said his own wife was the same way with their daughter. His comment was a subtle but powerful act of triangulation. He was aligning himself with Amara, positioning them together as two reasonable adults dealing with an overly anxious parent. He was validating Amara's feeling of independence, making her feel mature and capable for not giving in to her mother's fears. In that moment, Amara felt a small surge of pride. She was handling a crisis on her own. She was not a child who needed her mother to rescue her. She was an adult, making adult decisions. What she failed to recognize was that her independence was being weaponized against her. Her trust was being used as a tool to ensure her compliance. She went back into the office, sat down in the worn armchair, and took a sip of her coffee, completely unaware that she had just helped lock her own cage. An hour bled into 2. The initial rush of adrenaline and gratitude began to fade, replaced by a weary boredom. Amara scrolled through the saved photos on her phone, its battery life now in the single digits. From the garage, she could hear the intermittent clanking of metal, the whir of a power tool, the low muttering of Silas as he worked. The sounds were a comforting backdrop, evidence of progress. Silas came into the office to give her an update. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy hand. He said it was a tougher job than he'd anticipated. A bolt was rusted solid. He was going to have to drill it out. His expression was one of mild frustration, the look of a craftsman wrestling with a stubborn problem. It was all a performance, of course, a lie to stretch the time, to let the late hour and her growing fatigue work in his favor. It was during this second hour that the atmosphere began to shift. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Silas's conversation, once focused on the car and her studies, began to drift into more personal territory. He asked if she had a boyfriend. When she said no, he remarked that he was surprised. A smart, beautiful girl like her, he said, must have to fight the boys off with a stick. The comment hung in the air for a moment. Amara gave a tight, polite smile. It felt less like a compliment and more like an appraisal. She brushed it aside as a clumsy, old-fashioned attempt at a joke. But it was a probe, a test to see how she would react to a more personal, slightly objectifying line of inquiry. Her polite dismissal told him everything he needed to know. He lingered in the office doorway, no longer talking about the car. He asked about her family, where she lived. He wanted to know if she lived in a dorm or at home. When she said she lived with her mum, he nodded slowly, a strange, calculating look in his pale blue eyes. Each question was a piece of data, helping him build a more complete picture of her life, and more importantly, her vulnerabilities, Finally, he brought up the cost. He named a price for the new alternator and the labor. It was high, far more than Amara had expected. She felt a jolt of panic. She didn't have that kind of money. She explained, her voice small, that she would have to call her mother to help pay for it. Silas watched her, his expression unreadable. Then he waved a dismissive hand. He said they could work something out. He said he hated to see a young student get hit with a huge bill like that. He offered her a special discount, a price so low it was almost absurd. The relief she felt was immense, but it was tainted with a new feeling, a heavy sense of obligation. He had done her a massive favour. She was now deeply in his debt. This was the true transaction. A few minutes later, he returned from the garage bay. He said he was going to lock up the main door. It was getting very late, he explained, and you never knew who might be wandering around out here. The excuse was perfectly plausible. It was a matter of safety, but as he slid the heavy metal bolt into place, the sound echoed through the garage with a deafening finality. It was not the sound of security, it was the sound of a trap being sprung. A cold sliver of real fear, sharp and undeniable, cut through Amara's fatigue. She was locked inside a garage in the middle of nowhere with a man she barely knew. Her mother's worried words came rushing back to her. Suddenly, they didn't seem so overprotective. They seemed prescient. The final hour was a study in psychological torment. The sounds from the garage became less frequent. The comforting noise of work was replaced by long stretches of unsettling silence. Amara's phone, her last link to the outside world, finally died, its screen going black. The small office, which had at first felt like a cozy refuge, now felt like a cage. The glowing coils of the space heater seemed less cheerful and more menacing. She could feel Silas watching her. She couldn't see him, but she could sense his presence just beyond the office doorway. The air grew thick with a tense, unspoken energy. The friendly, fatherly mechanic had vanished, replaced by something she couldn't name, but deeply feared. Why was it taking so long? Why had he locked the door? The questions looped endlessly in her mind, each one amplifying her growing dread. She needed a reason to move, to see what was happening. Her dead phone provided the perfect excuse. She stood up, her muscles stiff, and walked to the office doorway. She called out to Silas, her voice trembling slightly. She asked if there was anywhere she could charge her phone. She needed to let her mother know it would be a while longer. Silas emerged from the shadows under the raised hood of her car. He seemed hesitant for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something in his eyes before the mask of the helpful mechanic slipped back into place. He told her there was an outlet behind his desk. He said to go ahead. He needed to find a specific wrench anyway. Walking into that office was the final fatal mistake. The room was just as she had left it, but now everything seemed sinister. The clutter on the desk, the grimy coffee mugs, the calendar on the wall. She found the outlet and plugged in her phone charger. As she knelt down, her hand brushed against a stack of invoices on the floor, knocking them over. She muttered an apology, though Silas was not in the room. As she gathered the scattered papers, her fingers closed around something small and plastic. She picked it up. It was a driver's license. The face staring up at her was that of a young woman, smiling, with bright, hopeful eyes. It wasn't Amara's. She frowned, confused. Why would he have this? Her eyes darted to a half-open drawer in the desk, the one the papers had been concealing. Her heart began to pound in her chest, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. With a trembling hand, she pulled the drawer open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dirty rags, were 4 more driver's licenses. All of them belonged to young women. Next to them was a small, horrific collection of personal effects. A silver bracelet with a heart charm, a University of Texas keychain, a single pearl earring, trophies. Her breath caught in her throat. This was not a collection of lost items. This was a gallery of victims. The blood drained from her face and a wave of nausea washed over her. Her mind, the logical, problem-solving mind of an engineer, began to race, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. The 24-hour sign, the isolated location, the fabricated story about his daughter, the overwhelming kindness, the locked door. It was all a lie, a meticulously constructed stage for a play he had performed before. She was not the first. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was not special. She was not lucky. She was just the next one. With new, terrified eyes, she scanned the office. Her gaze fell upon something tucked away under the desk, partially hidden by a trash can. It was a small dark screen, a monitor. She leaned closer, her body trembling uncontrollably. The monitor was on, displaying a grainy black and white image. It was a view of the garage bay, filmed from a high corner. She could see her car, the Beast, its hood still open, and she could see Silas. He was not working. He was not looking for a wrench. He was standing perfectly still, leaning against a workbench, watching the office doorway. He was waiting for her to discover the truth. The realization was the most terrifying of all. This discovery was part of his design. The horror was part of the hunt. In that single heart-stopping moment, the world fell away. There was no car repair. There was no kind mechanic. There was only the stark, brutal reality of her situation. She was prey, and the hunter had just revealed his teeth. The silence from the garage was no longer comforting. It was the patient stillness of a predator about to strike. Pure primal terror seized her. It was an instinct, older and more powerful than logic or reason. The imperative was simple. Run. Her mind, which only moments before had been paralyzed by shock, was now a whirlwind of frantic calculation. The back door of the office was her first thought. She scrambled towards it, her movements clumsy with panic. It was blocked. A heavy wooden plank had been nailed across it from the outside. There was no escape that way. The only way out was through the garage, through him. Her phone, still plugged into the wall, had a sliver of life, 4% battery. It was a desperate, fleeting hope. She fumbled with it, her fingers slick with sweat. She tried to send a text to her mother. A single, frantic message. Wrong, call police, garage. The signal bars on the screen were empty. The message failed to send. Failed. She had to be quiet. She had to be smart. She slipped off her shoes, her bare feet cold on the grimy linoleum floor. She took one last, terrified look at the monitor. Silas was still there, still watching the doorway, a dark silhouette in the grainy feed. He was toying with her. He knew she had seen the draw. He was waiting for her move. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Amara crept out of the office. She moved like a ghost, keeping to the shadows along the wall, her eyes locked on his form across the vast open space. The main garage door, the one he had so casually locked, was her only target. It was 50 feet away. It felt like 1,000 miles. Halfway there, a loose tool clattered to the floor as she brushed against a workbench. The sound was an explosion in the silence. Silas's head snapped in her direction. Their eyes met across the concrete expanse. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The mask of the folksy, kind-hearted mechanic did not just slip, it evaporated. The pale blue eyes, once disarming and warm, were now utterly devoid of emotion. They were flat, cold, and anciently predatory. He pushed himself off the workbench slowly, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. He spoke, his voice no longer the gravelly, reassuring baritone she had trusted. It was a low, chilling whisper that seemed to slither through the air. He said, "Leaving so soon? The fun is just getting started." That was it. The last thread of hope snapped. Amara didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Fueled by a surge of pure adrenaline, she sprinted towards the locked bay door, her bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her fingers refusing to obey. It was heavy, stiff. She was never going to make it. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, covering the distance between them in a few long strides. He was not the stocky, middle-aged man she had first met. He was a predator in his element, fast and brutally efficient. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like a steel vice. She fought back with the desperate, wild strength of a cornered animal. She kicked, she clawed, she bit. But it was useless. He was immensely strong, his body a wall of unyielding muscle. He spun her around, slamming her back against the cold metal of the door. The impact knocked the wind out of her. For a moment, her face was just inches from his. She saw the chilling emptiness in his eyes, the placid void where a soul should have been. There was no anger, no rage, just a cold, methodical purpose. He subdued her with a terrifying economy of motion, his actions practiced and certain. The fight was over before it had truly begun. He dragged her away from the door, away from her only chance at freedom, pulling her deeper into the shadows at the back of the garage. Her last coherent thought was of her mother's voice, filled with a worry she had been too naive to understand. The single overhead light in the main bay flickered once, then went out, plunging the world into absolute blackness. And Amara Jenkins was swallowed by the night. She was never seen again. The next morning, the official investigation began. Denise Jenkins, her voice hollow with a night of sleepless terror, formally filed a missing person report. She provided every detail she could remember, from Amara's call, the breakdown, the isolated garage, the name of the mechanic, Silas. Detective Isabella Rossi of the State Police was assigned the case. Rossi was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for being meticulous, cynical, and relentlessly thorough. She had seen too many of these cases to believe in simple explanations. A patrol unit had already driven the length of the old highway and found nothing. No broken-down car, no sign of a struggle. It was Rossi who insisted they search for the garage itself. Based on Denise's frantic description, they focused on the unpaved access roads, branching off the main highway. It took them 2 hours, but they found it. The sign, Croft's Auto Repair, was so faded and weather-beaten it was barely legible. The building itself looked abandoned, as if it had not been operational for years. Amara's car was gone. The large bay door was locked. Rossi ordered it forced open. The interior was a disappointment. It was empty and unnervingly clean. The concrete floor showed signs of having been recently and thoroughly swept. There were no oil stains, no stray tools, no clutter. To the uniformed officers, it looked like a dead end. A garage that had been empty for a long time. But to Detective Rossi, it screamed foul play. It was too clean. It felt sterile, staged. It was a crime scene that had been meticulously scrubbed. Rossi walked the perimeter of the room, her eyes scanning every inch. She believed that no matter how thorough a criminal was, they always left something behind. A hair, a fibre, a mistake. Her patience was rewarded. Near the base of a heavy steel workbench, something caught the light. It was a small silver stud earring, partially crushed as if it had been stepped on. It was a tiny, insignificant object that would have been easily missed, but Rossi collected it, bagging it as evidence. Later that day, a weeping Denise Jenkins confirmed it. It was Amara's. She wore a pair just like it every single day. That single earring transformed the case from a missing person inquiry into a major crimes investigation. The property records for the garage led them to a shell corporation with a post office box in another state. It was a dead end designed to be anonymous. But Rossi's team didn't give up. They dug into tax records, utility bills, anything that could link a real person to the property. After days of painstaking work, they found a name on an old electrical service application from 2 years prior, Silas Croft. The name was run through the National Criminal Database. The results came back immediately, and they were chilling. Silas Croft, age 49, had an extensive and violent criminal history, including convictions for assault, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. He had been released from a maximum security prison just 24 months ago. Having served 12 years of a 20-year sentence, he had dropped off parole's radar 6 months later. He was a ghost. A forensic psychologist was brought in to build a profile based on Croft's history and the evidence from the scene. The psychologist explained that Croft was likely a highly organized, psychopathic predator. He did not hunt impulsively. He created a controlled environment, the garage, and a non-threatening persona to lure his victims. His methodology was patient. He exploited vulnerability, not with force, but with feigned kindness. The 24-hour service sign was not a business model. It was a baited trap for the desperate and the stranded. An all-points bulletin was issued for Silas Croft and for Amara's blue sedan. The case was featured on the national news, but weeks turned into months, and the trail went cold. Croft had vanished as completely as his victims. Rossi, however, refused to let the case file gather dust. She kept Amara's photograph pinned to the board in her office, a constant, silent reminder of the girl who had been swallowed by the dark. The break came 6 months later from an anonymous tip line. A man who worked at a self-storage facility in a neighbouring state reported something strange. A unit, rented under a false name with cash, had a car inside it that matched the description of the one from the news reports. He had only seen it when the renter had briefly opened the door. Within hours, Rossi and a team of FBI agents raided the storage facility. They cut the lock on Unit 218. Inside they found it, Amara's beloved beast. The car was cold and silent. The forensic team went over it with microscopic precision. They found traces of Croft's DNA on the steering wheel and Amara's blood on the passenger seat carpet. More horrifyingly, in a hidden compartment welded under the trunk, they found a small locked box. Inside was a collection of trophies: the silver bracelet with the heart charm, the University of Texas keychain, the pearl earring, and a new addition, a student ID card for the Statey University, bearing the bright, smiling face of Amara Jenkins. They now had the evidence to link Croft to Amara's abduction and likely murder. Using data from the storage facility's security cameras and tracing the cash used for payment, they began to build a new trail. It led them to a small, quiet town in the Midwest, 300 miles away. It led them to a man who called himself David Miller, a friendly, quiet handyman who had recently moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. A house that happened to be located just off a lonely, unlit county road. When they arrested him, Silas Croft did not resist. The charming persona was gone, leaving only the cold, empty void that Amara had seen in her final moments. He was calm, silent, and unremorseful. During interrogation, he said nothing. He never confessed. He never gave them the grim satisfaction of knowing what he had done with Amara or with the other young women whose lives he had stolen. Their bodies were never found. Despite the lack of a body, the mountain of forensic and circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Silas Croft was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of Amara Jenkins, as well as 3 other women identified from the trophies in his box. He was sentenced to consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would die in a cage. In the years that followed, Denise Jenkins became a fierce advocate for the families of missing persons. She founded a non-profit in Amara's name, an organization dedicated to raising awareness and pushing for legislative changes to better track violent offenders released on parole. She honored her daughter's memory, not by succumbing to grief, but by working to prevent other families from ever experiencing her pain. The story of Amara Jenkins became a dark, cautionary tale, a story about a broken-down car, a solitary light in the darkness, and a monster wearing a mask of kindness. It serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators are often not the ones who stalk from the shadows, but the ones who stand in the light, smiling, offering a helping hand. It reminds us that evil is patient and that it knows, all too well, how to exploit our most decent and trusting instincts.